Welcome back, gang. Well, I've been awfully busy this week. Went to a wedding a few days ago and getting ready for my trip. So, by the posting of this video, I will already be traveling the country for sightseeing. Alright, so today I will talk about one of my least favorite topics politics. But I figure I should share my views on this as it is part of my life and incredibly relevant these days. One thing people must understand is that I absolutely hate sharing my political viewpoints with others, mostly because there are many people who might not agree with me and I don't want to argue. I hate arguing. If you don't agree with my viewpoints, that's fine. You don't have to. You believe whatever you want to believe. I will, of course, try to validate every point that I want to make. My political views have changed over time, as I will get into, but first, I just want to share my view on the role of government and why I think people are maybe asking too much, or similarly, maybe not asking enough of their governments. I believe it is the role of government to protect the lives of its citizens. And that is all. Essentially, governments interact with other governments in that capacity, and that is all. And when a government oversteps its authority, the citizens have a right to find a way, hopefully a peaceful resolution that will be mutually agreeable to all parties involved. So let's take a look at a history of my political affiliations. So when I was very young, I didn't have a care in the world. Nothing mattered to me besides what I had to gain from my own living. I wasn't concerned about government matters and more concerned about just being a kid. It's unfortunate that kids nowadays have to really consider these things as they get older, but maybe that's a good thing because they will become more informed adults. At least more informed than I was when I was growing up. So, the first political event that I remember, I wasn't all that concerned with, was the election of George H.W. Bush in 1988 and his famous No New Taxes speech. Well, at 8 years old, taxes was the last thing I was concerned about. So things continued as normal until 1991 when I was discussing with a bunch of other students on the playground about the Iraqi war and Operation Desert Storm. I knew very little about it, but I thought it warranted attention. Keep in mind that this was a time before the internet, so it was much more difficult to get information. But sometimes, when I wasn't too busy, I would check the news and see what all the fuss was about. And that was when I learned about the oil trade and Iraq invading Kuwait. Well, these places were far from me. At that point, I couldn't even locate them on a map. So the problem seemed a distant matter. I remember while I was on the swings, on the playground, many of the children on the playground were debating whether America should have been interfering in foreign politics. It was a distant thing, and America need not have gotten involved. Well, the class at my grade level was very politically minded even then, some even having family in governments, but of course, my family wanted no part of it. We had our own internal politics to worry about. It just didn't concern us. It was my introduction to foreign affairs. And that was all well and good up until I went to middle school. In 1992, it was an election year, and the other students were curious as to what my political affiliation was. Of course, back then I had no idea what that even meant. I had heard the terms Republican and Democrat used, but I didn't really understand their meanings, and especially the differences between them. So, once again, just to keep myself in the loop, I did some research. There was one candidate who continued to show up on television again and again, H. Ross Perot. So I listened to him intently and thought he had some very sound ideas about the economy. Well, I didn't really know how the economy ran when I was 12, but I liked the sound of it. Had I been old enough to vote back then, I would have voted for the independent, Perot. And I suppose it was then that my political affiliation was chosen. Well, the Clinton administration was just that, and affirmative action had no value to me. It focused on women, of which I am not. 1996 was another election year, and once again, I was on Team Perot. Of course, I still couldn't vote, but I was able to use the internet at that point to get more information about the candidates. So we had 4 more years of Clinton. No big deal. The whole Monica Lewinsky scandal was big in the news, but I didn't really understand anything about it. But I started becoming more interested in world events. As I mentioned previously, Japan started becoming very interesting to me. American politics lost my interest. Not that it was really a big interest to begin with. In 1997, I registered to vote, but the registration asked for a political affiliation. I heard somewhere that if I registered as independent, I wouldn't be able to vote. So instead, I used my family's political affiliation of Democrat. Probably a mistake, but I was still a kid. So in 1998, I went to college. And then my life took a turn for the worse. Once again, nothing mattered to me, especially politics. In 2000, there was another election year, but I didn't care and didn't bother to vote. I heard of a certain Ralph Nader, even as early as high school, and if I had voted in college, I suppose I would have voted for him. But I was not as informed as I had been in previous years for obvious reasons. To be fair, there were no really good candidates that year. I suppose the most interesting aspect of the election was the Florida recount that ultimately led to Bush's success, and that was when I first realized that elections were a rigged system in America. Yes, Bush lost the popular vote, but still won the election. I just thought it was some fluke in the system. Well, none of it really mattered to me at that point in time, and still didn't matter when the Twin Towers fell. I had no idea why Bush declared war on Iraq, and this was the first time I felt that a president was unfit for his position. His position on the economy was similarly disappointing, but I figured I would only need to worry about it for 4 years. And then he was reelected. I was shocked, though I wasn't altogether sold on Kerry, and Nader seemed to be a distant memory. I was a working adult then, but I still wasn't taking American politics seriously at that time. That is, until 2007, when the economy took a turn for the worse. At that point, I felt that politics did have an impact on my life. So I started getting more involved and more informed. Also, Bush's mishandling of Hurricane Katrina only cemented my belief of his unpreparedness as president. By 2008, I had enough of Republican Party nonsense. I knew nothing of third party candidates, so Barack Obama was an obvious choice. And I believe the best choice for the country. I still feel that he is the best president to have taken office in my lifetime, which isn't really saying much, but he did a lot of good for the country, even during a failing economy that was not his fault. So naturally, I supported him. And despite losing my job in 2011, I still supported him. So naturally, in 2012, I cast my vote for Obama. But he had two things going against him. For one, the Republican controlled Congress constantly blocked anything he was trying to accomplish, which made his work difficult and, well, unsubstantial. The other thing was his foreign policy, and this is somewhere that I didn't necessarily agree on. The wars in Libya and Syria were not the business of America. America is not the world police. We should only be responsible for maintaining peace, not fighting meaningless conflicts. We tried in both Korea and Vietnam before I was born, but both times failed. So I consider Obama to be a great president, but not a perfect president. Even though I left the United States in 2014, 2 years into his presidency, well, his second term of presidency, for completely personal reasons that I've mentioned in another video. In 2015, a clown came onto the stage in the form of Donald Trump, a businessman who wanted to buy the country. It is my opinion that a business person should never be a politician, as it is a conflict of interest. Well, I think 1980s and 1990s Trump seemed to be a pretty good and decent person, but I think that maybe he changed along the way. Of course, I didn't support Trump, but I didn't support Clinton either. Not because she was a woman, but because I think she would have been a weak leader. Russia, China, North Korea, and the Middle East would have eaten her alive. So, in 2015, it was time for me to do a bit of research. Of the independents, only Gary Johnson and Jill Stein interest me. Stein was my likely support, since environmentalism is one of my top priorities. But, as with Clinton, probably too weak on an international front. So, in the end, I voted for Johnson. I didn't support all of his views, but enough to merit my decision. In my defense, and the defense of America, there were no good candidates for president in 2016. In September 2016, I returned to America awaiting my trip to Japan. I didn't think my political decision would matter to me since at that point I had already decided to live in a foreign country. I watched the campaign and election like a hawk. I spent election night in front of my computer just watching how the events unfolded. And perhaps to everyone's surprise, Trump took an early lead. Pennsylvania flip flopped several times before falling on Trump, giving him the victory. With a nearly 3 million popular vote loss to Clinton, it was a clear indication of the failure of the American political system. I realized two things after that election. Firstly, no third party candidate has a snowball's chance in hell of winning the presidency. Well, maybe next election, but probably not. Secondly, New York is so decidedly Democrat, as it has voted such in every election of my life, except the Reagan election, that as a New Yorker, I feel my opinion hardly matters. But American politics is a broken system, and America is truly a divided country. So here we are. So, what are my political motivations? Well, they are fairly similar to my life motivations. The environment and environmental protection remains my top concern. I am decidedly anti war and pro peace, so international cooperation is another high priority. Education is yet another one of my priorities, so education reform is high on my agenda. Lower on my list of important topics is healthcare, which is absolutely important, but not as broken as other systems, which really isn't saying much. I strongly believe in universal and affordable healthcare. And, of course, discrimination, which shouldn't even need to be discussed, but often comes up. It doesn't matter what kind of person a person is, all people should have the same rights afforded in the system. The American system is broken and outdated and needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. As far as other countries and their governments, as an outsider, I have no right to criticize them. My views in America translate to other countries as well. Every human being has the right to live as they see fit. And that is where I stand politically. Well, my views are just that, my own, and may not reflect the views of others, but if you enjoyed or agree with anything that I have mentioned, feel free to give a like, subscribe, comment, and share this with others. I especially like comments that allow me to share my thoughts with my community. And if you are so inclined, consider supporting me on my Patreon. YouTube doesn't pay me in any way for these videos, so support would be greatly appreciated. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next time.